A young nurse lost her job after saving the life of a 10-year-old girl when a stray bullet hit her. Next day, she received a shocking invitation from the president. Late that rainy evening, a young nurse named Matilda was wrapping up her shift at the city hospital in Texas. The hallways, once bustling with activity, had fallen quiet under the blanket of night. Outside, rain pelted the windows, and thunder rumbled across the sky like an approaching stampede. She had just signed her last patient chart and was preparing to head home when the silence shattered. The emergency room doors burst open. Shouts filled the air. Footsteps pounded. The calm of the night was immediately swallowed by panic. Matilda turned instinctively, already moving before her brain fully caught up. Paramedics stormed through the doors, pushing a gurney with a tiny figure strapped to it. A 10-year-old girl, no older than Matilda's niece, lay motionless. Her small frame was soaked in blood, her breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. Gunshot wound to the chest. No pulse. One of the paramedics barked as they rolled her toward the trauma bay. Matilda's heart dropped. The trauma team hadn't arrived. There had been a major pileup on the interstate, and every available surgeon was stuck in traffic or rerouted. Matilda glanced around. The ER was understaffed. Just a few nurses, one general physician, and a tech team who looked as terrified as they were unprepared for this. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She knew every step of what needed to be done, but she wasn't authorized. Protocol was clear. No nurse, no matter how experienced, was permitted to perform invasive surgery. But protocol hadn't seen a little girl bleed out in front of her. Matilda stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. Prepper. Now. I need a thoracotomy tray, stat. A stunned silence followed. One of the newer nurses blinked at her. Matilda, you can't. She'll die in 5 minutes if we wait. Matilda snapped, her voice sharp but steady. Get the tray. The girl's name was Ava. A teacher's aide had found her collapsed near a school playground, the victim of a stray bullet from a nearby robbery. The bullet had torn through her chest, missing her heart by millimeters but collapsing her lung and severing an artery. Her vitals were crashing. Her skin was pale, lips tinged with blue. There was no more time. Matilda washed her hands in record time and slipped on gloves, her brain locking into years of training. As a nurse, she wasn't allowed to lead surgeries, but she had assisted in dozens. She'd watched, learned, and prepared for the worst even when others hadn't. With tools in hand and a shaky assistant beside her, she made the incision. The room faded away. All she could hear was her own breathing and the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Her fingers worked methodically, isolating the damage, applying pressure, stitching vessels. She didn't stop until the bleeding did. After what felt like a lifetime, the girl let out a soft gasp. Then another. Her chest began to rise, slow, uneven, but alive. The ER erupted into motion again as backup arrived, too late to do more than take over and stabilize what Matilda had already done. She stepped back, shaking, covered in blood. Her legs threatened to give out, but she held firm. The girl had survived. Matilda expected chaos. Instead, the room stood in stunned silence. For a second, everyone seemed unsure of whether to applaud or reprimand her. She didn't care. She had done what had to be done. But the calm didn't last long. The next morning, Matilda was called into the boardroom. The hospital administrator, a stiff, gray-haired man with glasses too large for his narrow face, sat at the head of the table. HR representatives flanked him like statues. They asked her to recount the events. She did, without embellishment or apology. There was a long pause. Then, the words came. You violated strict medical protocol. You are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Matilda didn't cry. She simply stood, handed over her badge, and walked out of the only job she had ever loved. It wasn't until she got home, still wearing the same shoes she'd worn during the operation, that the reality hit her. She'd saved a child, and for that, she had lost everything. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above, casting a sterile white glow over the quiet recovery room. Machines blinked with dull rhythm, the only sounds a gentle mechanical hum and the faint, steady beeping of a heart monitor. In the center of the room, beneath crisp hospital sheets and surrounded by cold metal rails, lay a girl far too small for the bed she occupied. Her name was Ava Lennox, 10 years old. The bullet had torn through her chest like a thief in the night, stealing her breath, her pulse. nearly her life. Now she lay motionless, her pale face turned toward the window where weak morning light crept through half-drawn blinds. At her bedside sat a man dressed in quiet power. Custom-tailored charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, shoes that hadn't touched dirt in years. But he looked nothing like a man of privilege in that moment. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled, hair ruffled. One hand gripped his daughter's tiny fingers while the other rested on his forehead, as if trying to press the weight of the last 12 hours out of his skull. This was Charles Lennox, billionaire tech entrepreneur, media-shy philanthropist, and the father of the girl in the bed. He hadn't left her side since he'd been called to the hospital late the night before. When he arrived, his daughter had already been through emergency surgery. The staff had told him she'd been minutes, seconds from dying. A nurse had made a judgment call. There hadn't been time to wait for the trauma team, who were stuck in a pileup outside the city. The child had no pulse. The nurse had taken over and operated, and she had saved Ava's life. Now, hours later, Charles still hadn't been able to speak to that nurse. No one had seen her. Her name, Matilda Grace, had been mentioned once, almost in passing, by a nervous physician. But when Charles asked to speak to her, he was told she had been let go that morning. Fired. The absurdity of it hadn't hit him at first. He was still too numb from seeing Ava in that hospital bed. But the more the silence dragged on, the more it festered inside him, twisting into something sharp and cold. There was a knock at the door. Charles didn't look up. A nurse stepped in, young, probably in her 20s, her scrubs slightly wrinkled, her hands clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Lennox," she said softly. He slowly turned his head. I just wanted to say I'm glad your daughter is okay. We were all terrified when she came in last night." His eyes searched hers. "Did you work the night shift?" The nurse nodded. "Did you see her?" "Who?" "Matilda Grace." The nurse hesitated. Then she stepped inside the room and shut the door behind her. "I did." Charles straightened slightly. "Tell me what happened." She looked down at her tablet, then back up. "We got the alert about the incoming trauma. Child with a gunshot wound. The ER was chaos. Everyone was scrambling. The trauma surgeons were delayed. Matilda, she didn't wait. She looked at the girl, and I swear, sir, it was like something flipped inside her. She just knew there was no time. She grabbed the tray, gave orders like a seasoned surgeon, and started the procedure herself." Charles stared. "She wasn't reckless," the nurse added quickly. "She was calm, focused. Every step she took was calculated. I've never seen anything like it. We were all just standing there, waiting for permission to act. But she did it. She saved that little girl's life. And they fired her for it." The nurse looked down. "Hospital policy says no nurse can perform invasive trauma surgery without clearance, especially not alone. But no one else was there. She knew she'd be punished," the nurse said softly. "She did it anyway." Charles rose slowly from his chair. He walked to the far end of the room, hands on his hips, staring at the tiled floor. He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned, eyes blazing. "What kind of place punishes someone for doing the right thing?" The nurse didn't respond. He stepped closer to her. "Do you know where she is?" The girl hesitated, then shook her head. "She left before sunrise. She didn't say much. Just packed her locker and disappeared. I think she knew what was coming." Charles exhaled through his nose, the sound low and dangerous. "If you hear from her, tell her I'm looking for her." The nurse nodded once, wide-eyed, then slipped out of the room. Charles turned back to Ava. She looked so small, so breakable. He sat again, lowering himself carefully into the chair beside her bed. His fingers brushed a lock of hair away from her forehead. He thought about the last time they'd argued, about ballet shoes. She wanted pink satin. He said white was more practical. They hadn't spoken for hours afterward. Now all he wanted was for her to open her eyes. He reached for the sketch pad the nurse had placed at the foot of the bed. It had been found in Ava's backpack, stained with a few drops of blood. The cover was dinted, the corner torn. He opened it gently. Inside were drawings of things she loved. Her dog, a cupcake with a smiling face, a spaceship, a lopsided cartoon of him holding her hand. On the next page, a new sketch had been started, pencil still rough and unsure. A woman with curly hair and big eyes. A name was scrawled beneath it in Ava's shaky print. Matilda. Charles swallowed. Even in her pain, even as she slipped into unconsciousness, Ava had remembered the woman who'd helped her. A stranger. A nurse who had refused to let her die. He stared at the drawing for a long time. And then he stood. He walked out of the recovery room and headed straight for the nurse's station. Behind the desk sat an older woman with glasses perched at the edge of her nose. "I want her file," Charles said flatly. The woman looked up. "Whose?" "Matilda Grace. Nurse. Fired this morning." "I'm afraid I can't release personnel." He pulled out his phone and tapped a contact. "That's fine. I'll have a judge sign a subpoena in the next 30 minutes. The woman stared at him. "Or," he said, "you can do the right thing." Like she did. There was a long pause. Then, reluctantly, the woman turned to her computer and began typing. A few minutes later, she printed a single sheet. "This is all I'm allowed to give." Charles took it. A phone number. An old address. No current employer listed. It would be enough. He tucked the paper into his coat pocket and walked back toward Ava's room. In the hallway, two doctors whispered near the vending machine. "Ridiculous, firing her," one said. "She should be getting a damn medal." "Hospital's trying to protect itself from a lawsuit," the other replied. "She cut into a child's chest without orders. If the girl had died, they'd be ruined." "She didn't die," the first doctor snapped. "Because of her." Charles slowed as he passed them, just long enough to let their words sink in. He knew now what he had to do. Find her. Thank her. Make it right. He would make sure Matilda Grace was never forgotten. He would ensure that what she did would be seen not as an act of rebellion, but as the very essence of heroism. The world needed to know that courage still existed, even inside white walls filled with silence and rules. He stepped into Ava's room once more. She stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. "Daddy?" she whispered. He leaned forward, his voice cracking. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe." A faint smile touched her lips. "Matilda," he nodded. "I know. I'm going to find her." She closed her eyes again, peace returning to her face. And in that moment, Charles Lennox made a vow not just as a father, but as a man who had seen what real bravery looked like. He would find Matilda Grace. And when he did, the whole world would know her name. The rain had stopped, but the skies still hung gray above the city, as if reluctant to brighten. Inside a small apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood of Queens, Matilda Grace sat hunched over her laptop, elbows on the cluttered kitchen table, the glow of the screen reflecting off her tired eyes. Her coffee had gone cold. Half a slice of toast sat untouched beside her. The job boards were endless, a sea of scrolling rejection, silence, and polite declines. Each listing seemed colder than the last. Minimum 3 years trauma experience. No history of disciplinary action. She clicked past them, her stomach churning every time the screen refreshed. Her career, built over 7 hard-working years, had unraveled in a single night. It had been only 3 days since the emergency room, since the moment she'd looked down at a lifeless little girl and made a choice that defied protocol and shattered expectations. The girl had survived. Matilda had not, at least not professionally. She'd been dismissed quietly at sunrise. No thank you. No final meeting. Just a paper envelope and a security escort to the exit. She'd gone home numb, thinking maybe there'd be some mistake. Maybe someone would call. Maybe someone would see reason. But no one did. Until now. Her phone buzzed against the tabletop, the sound startling in the silence. She stared at the screen, calling. Nina, ER nurse. Her heart jumped. She hadn't heard from anyone at the hospital since her firing. She answered quickly. "Nina," she said, voice tentative. "Matilda?" Nina breathed, a little out of breath. "Thank God. I wasn't sure if this was still your number." "It is." "What's going on?" There was a pause. Then, "He wants to meet you." "Who?" "Ava's father. Mr. Lennox. Charles Lennox." Matilda's breath caught. "What?" "He's been calling everyone. The board, the floor managers, nurses. He got my number from an old shift schedule. He said he won't stop until he finds you." Matilda's pulse raced. She hadn't thought he'd even know her name. "He said he wants to see you in person," Nina continued. "He gave me a place. A restaurant, downtown. Just you and him. And his daughter." Matilda's throat tightened. I don't know if that's a good idea." Nina's voice softened. "He didn't sound angry, Matilda. He sounded emotional. Just go." There was a long silence before Matilda nodded, forgetting Nina couldn't see her. "Okay," she whispered. "What time?" The restaurant was unlike anywhere Matilda had ever been. A private suite, tucked away on the top floor of a building that looked more like a luxury bank vault than a place to eat. Everything was glass and gold, quiet music playing under soft recessed lights. A view of the skyline stretched across the far wall like a painted mural. It felt surreal just walking through the door. She had dressed simply out. Pressed navy slacks, a clean blouse, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. She didn't know what else to wear to a meeting like this. Her palms were damp. She wiped them on her coat before stepping through the frosted glass doors into the private dining area. And then she saw them. Charles Lennox stood as she entered. Tall, commanding, dressed in a tailored black suit. But it wasn't his presence that struck her first. It was the girl beside him. Ava. Bright-eyed, smiling. Her chest was still wrapped in medical bandages under her soft pink cardigan, but her cheeks were full of color now. Her hair was neatly braided, and her legs swung gently under the table as she beamed at Matilda like they'd known each other forever. Matilda froze. "Miss Grace," Charles said, stepping forward. His voice was gentler than she expected, lower, steady, filled with weight. Matilda stumbled over her words. "Mr. Lennox, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. He extended his hand, but as she reached for it, he surprised her by pulling her into a hug, firm, real, no pretenses. When he pulled away, his eyes were glassy. "You saved my daughter's life," he said, voice hoarse. "No words could ever thank you enough." Matilda felt tears prick her eyes. "I just did what I thought was right." "You broke the rules," he said with a faint smile. "And thank God you did." Ava stood up and walked over. "Hi," she said softly. Matilda knelt down, holding out her hand. "Hi there, sweetheart." Ava threw her arms around her. Matilda couldn't help it. She hugged the girl tightly, closing her eyes, feeling the heartbeat against her shoulder. The last time she held her, that heart had been still. "She drew pictures of you," Charles said, even when she couldn't speak yet. "She remembered your name. She asked about you every hour. And when I found out what happened, what they did to you..." His voice faltered. "I made some calls. I asked questions. But I couldn't find you until today. I wanted this to be in person." They sat down together, the three of them. Waitstaff moved silently in and out of the room, delivering warm rolls and fresh juice for Ava, but no one touched the food. The conversation was the only thing that mattered. "I know what they did to you," Charles said, opening a sleek black briefcase beside him. "I know they fired you. That they stripped you of everything because you dared to save a child's life. I don't blame them," Matilda said softly. "They were protecting the hospital. I broke a policy." "You broke a policy," he said, "and saved a life. That's the kind of person I want around my daughter." "Around me?" He pulled out a check and slid it across the table. Matilda stared at it. She didn't move. $20 million. Her name was on it. She blinked, then looked up at him. This can't be real." "It's very real," he said. "It's yours. A thank you. For giving me my daughter back. For doing what no one else dared to do. For being brave when it mattered most." Her hands trembled as she touched the edge of the paper. "I can't accept this." "Yes," he said firmly. "You can." There was silence for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "But it's not just a gift. It's a beginning. I want you to join my private medical team. No boards. No politics. You'll have the best equipment, the best staff. You'll build it with me. Name your title, name your salary. It's yours." Matilda blinked at him. "Why me?" "Because you made a decision most people wouldn't. You didn't freeze. You didn't wait. You acted. That kind of courage, that kind of instinct, you can't train it. You are what I want this team to be." She didn't respond right away. Tears clouded her vision. She looked down at Ava, who had begun coloring a napkin with a pen from her dad's pocket, drawing stick figures and hearts. "I don't even know where to start," Matilda said. Charles smiled. "Start by saying yes." She looked at the check again. She thought of her cold kitchen table, of the scrolling rejection emails, of the sting of being walked out like a criminal. And then she thought of Ava, alive, smiling, drawing stick figures in a pink sweater. The choice felt easy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll do it." Charles exhaled, his expression softening into something between joy and relief. He extended his hand again, and this time she took it with confidence. "I hope you're ready," he said, "because this is only the beginning." They talked for over an hour after that. He asked for her vision. She shared ideas she hadn't voiced in years, dreams of patient-centered trauma care, mobile units for emergency medicine, training programs for underfunded clinics. He listened to every word. As the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds outside, Matilda looked out over the skyline and realized something deep inside her had shifted. She was no longer the nurse who'd been cast aside. She was no longer the quiet woman who waited for permission. She was the woman who acted, the hero they never saw coming. And now she had the chance to build something bigger than she'd ever imagined. It all started with one choice, one moment, one child. And now it would change the world. Late that day, as the rain gradually softened into a mist that blanketed the city streets, the story of Matilda's brave act began spreading far beyond the walls of the city hospital. What had been hushed whispers among the hospital staff became a thunderous roar echoing through social media feeds, newsrooms, and dinner table conversations across the country. The narrative was compelling, raw, and deeply human. A young nurse defied strict protocols and hospital hierarchy to save the life of a 10-year-old girl suffering a gunshot wound, only to be fired the next day for her audacity. The story struck a chord in the hearts of millions, highlighting the ongoing conflict between cold bureaucratic rules and the urgent, unpredictable realities of medical emergencies. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForMatilda and #NursesAreHeroes surged across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Posts celebrating her courage and condemning the hospital's decision flooded timelines. Stories from countless healthcare workers emerged, sharing their own moments of difficult choices, risks taken, and sometimes harsh repercussions. The public was captivated not only by Matilda's story, but also by the larger conversation it ignited, about the humanity that too often clashes with rigid systems. Major news outlets wasted no time. Breaking news banners flashed across television screens, and the headlines dominated front pages and online news portals. Nurse fired for saving girl's life sparks national outcry. Morning shows invited experts and advocates to debate the ethics of hospital policies, while investigative journalists dug into the hospital's decision, exposing cracks in a system that prioritizes rules over people. Yet amidst the swirling media storm, the focus always returned to Matilda herself. A quiet, determined figure thrust unwillingly into the spotlight. Matilda found herself caught in a whirlwind of interviews and public appearances. Despite her sudden fame, she remained remarkably humble, always shifting the spotlight back to the patient, the girl whose life hung in the balance that rainy night. At a televised interview, sitting beside Ava, whose recovery was steady but cautious, Matilda's voice carried a calm strength that resonated deeply. "I wasn't thinking about rules," she said softly, her eyes steady. "I was thinking about saving a life. Every second counts in situations like that. If we wait for permission, sometimes it's already too late." Her words became a rallying cry for countless healthcare workers who had wrestled with similar dilemmas. Letters poured into her mailbox and inbox, each telling stories of courage, sacrifice, and often punishment. Nurses in rural clinics, urban hospitals, and emergency rooms shared their own battles against red tape that hindered their ability to save lives. Patients and families sent notes of gratitude and sorrow, recounting moments when swift, sometimes unauthorized, actions had made the difference between life and death. One letter, written in shaky handwriting from a nurse in a small town in Texas, described how she had been disciplined for administering a medication without prior approval because her patient's condition was rapidly deteriorating. Another, from a mother in Chicago, recounted the heartbreaking loss of her son due to delays in treatment caused by bureaucratic hurdles. Each letter reaffirmed the importance of Matilda's stand and fueled her resolve to push for change. Recognizing the power and responsibility of her newfound platform, Matilda resolved to do more than simply tell her story. With the generous financial support from Ava's father, Charles Lennox, she established the Grace Foundation for Medical Courage. The foundation's mission was clear: to protect and empower healthcare professionals who, like Matilda, face retaliation for putting patients first. The foundation aimed to offer legal support, create educational programs on ethical decision-making in emergencies, and provide scholarships for nurses specializing in trauma care. Building the foundation became Matilda's new purpose. Long hours were spent meeting with legal experts, hospital administrators, and patient advocates, crafting a network designed to uplift the voices of those often silenced by fear and institutional resistance. The foundation's launch was met with widespread acclaim, receiving prominent media coverage that further amplified its mission. Despite her rising fame, Matilda remained grounded. She used every interview and speech to emphasize that her story was not about glorification, but a call to reform. "This isn't just about me," she told a packed auditorium at a national nursing conference, her voice steady and passionate. "It's about creating an environment where healthcare workers are supported, not punished, when they do what's right in the moment. We owe it to our patients and to ourselves to fight for this change." Her words sparked action. Hospitals across the country began reassessing their emergency protocols, many pledging to develop clearer guidelines that would empower nurses and doctors to act decisively when lives are at stake. Legislators took note as well, with proposals emerging to legally protect healthcare workers acting in good faith during crises. The public, inspired by Matilda's courage, rallied behind these efforts, making her a beacon of hope for change in a complex system. Throughout it all, Matilda's image transformed from that of a fired nurse to a national symbol of bravery and integrity. She appeared on morning shows, was featured in magazines, and spoke at conferences, always with Ava by her side. Their bond, forged in crisis, was a powerful reminder of why Matilda had risked everything. The story of a nurse and a little girl became a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the profound impact one person's courage can have. Yet, behind the scenes, Matilda never lost sight of the countless healthcare workers still struggling in silence. She traveled extensively, visiting hospitals and clinics, meeting nurses and doctors, hearing their stories firsthand. Every encounter strengthened her commitment to the foundation and its mission. The Grace Foundation expanded, launching training programs on ethical decision-making and emergency response, ensuring that no healthcare worker would have to face impossible choices alone. Letters continued to arrive, some hopeful, others heart-wrenching. A young nurse in Ohio thanked Matilda for giving her the courage to speak out after being threatened for bypassing protocol to save a newborn. An emergency room doctor in California shared how he implemented new policies inspired by Matilda's story to protect his team. Each message was a testament to the rippling effect of her actions. Public adoration followed, but Matilda kept her focus unwaveringly on the work ahead. She understood that fame was fleeting, but the fight for justice and compassion in healthcare was ongoing. The money she received was carefully invested, not in luxury, but in tools, programs, and support systems to empower those on the front lines. Behind every public appearance was a woman grappling with the profound change in her life. From a quiet nurse committed to her patients, she had become a household name, a catalyst for change, and a source of hope. Her journey was far from over, but the path she now walked was illuminated by the lives she had touched and the movement she had inspired. Matilda's story was no longer just about a nurse who lost her job. It was about a nation waking up to the need for compassion in its hospitals, about healthcare workers finally having a voice, and about the enduring power of a single act of courage. As the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, her resolve only grew stronger. There were still battles to fight, still policies to change, and still lives to save. But with every step, Matilda knew she was not alone. Her fight was now a shared one, a collective movement fueled by compassion, bravery, and an unyielding belief that doing the right thing should never come at the cost of justice. And for Matilda, that belief was the light guiding her forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. Late that afternoon, just 7 days after her story had captured the nation's heart and headlines, Matilda sat quietly in her small apartment, the muted sounds of the bustling city filtering through her window. The events of the past week swirled in her mind, images of the rushed emergency room, the frantic hands saving a fragile life, the chaotic moments where protocol clashed with instinct and courage. She was still grappling with the reality of being fired for doing what she knew was right. Yet, amid the uncertainty, a fragile thread of hope had begun to grow. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Standing on the threshold was a courier, a man in crisp uniform holding a single white envelope. It was pristine, heavy, and embossed with the unmistakable seal of the United States government. Her breath caught in her throat. Without a word, he handed it to her, nodding respectfully before retreating. Matilda's fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. The words seemed to glow on the page. An official invitation from the White House, summoning her to meet the President of the United States in recognition of her extraordinary courage and dedication. It was surreal, a sharp contrast to the uncertainty and rejection she had faced only days before. For a moment, the room felt impossibly small. Her thoughts rushed ahead, imagining the towering halls of the White House, the iconic Oval Office where history had been made time and again. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was just a nurse from a city hospital, not a political figure or celebrity. Yet here she was, chosen by the nation's highest office to stand as a symbol of hope and bravery. The days until the meeting passed in a dizzying blur. News outlets buzzed with speculation. Friends reached out with congratulations. But Matilda remained grounded, her focus narrowing on the simple act of preparing herself. Choosing her outfit became an exercise in quiet reflection. She settled on a navy suit. Professional, modest, the color of steady resolve. It was a choice that mirrored her journey, understated, yet unyielding. On the morning of her appointment, Matilda woke early, the city outside still cloaked in the pale light of dawn. She dressed carefully, smoothing the fabric of her suit and tucking stray strands of hair behind her ears. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman transformed. No longer the anxious nurse who had lost her job, but someone ready to face the world on her own terms. The cab ride to the White House was surreal. The grand neoclassical columns loomed as the vehicle pulled up to Pennsylvania Avenue, a testament to centuries of leadership and change. Matilda's heart pounded in rhythm with the rapid click of her shoes on the marble floors as she was escorted through the hallowed corridors. Portraits of presidents past gazed down, their painted eyes witnessing the unfolding of a new chapter. Entering the Oval Office felt like stepping into the very heart of power. The air was warm, sunlight streaming through tall windows, casting a golden glow across the room's rich wood and leather furnishings. There, waiting with a warm smile and outstretched hand, stood the president. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the vastness of history seemed to narrow to a single human connection. "Matilda," the president began, their voice calm but filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for your courage. You remind us all of what true leadership means, not the loudest voice or the grandest speech, but quiet bravery and compassion when it matters most." Matilda's hands shook as she shook the president's hand, the weight of the moment settling deep in her chest. Here was a woman who, in a single act of decisive kindness, had challenged the status quo and changed a life. And now, she was being recognized not just as a nurse, but as a beacon of hope. Photographers captured the moment, the handshake, the smiles, the shared respect. The image quickly went viral, a powerful symbol that transcended politics and spoke to something universal: the human spirit's capacity to rise when faced with crisis. As the meeting progressed, the president listened attentively as Matilda spoke, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. They discussed the importance of medical professionals empowered to act with courage, the challenges of rigid protocols, and the urgent need to support those who put patients first, sometimes at great personal risk. Outside the Oval Office, the world waited breathlessly. News outlets prepared stories, social media buzzed with hashtags celebrating Matilda's bravery, and ordinary citizens found in her story a source of inspiration and hope. After the formal meeting, Matilda was invited to tour the White House grounds. As she walked through the rose garden, the fragrant blossoms whispering in the spring breeze, she allowed herself a moment to breathe in the reality of her new path. Gone was the uncertainty and fear that had haunted her days in the ER. Here was a future filled with promise, one shaped by resilience, courage, and the recognition that sometimes doing what's right means risking everything. That evening, standing on the balcony of her modest apartment, Matilda gazed out over the city lights glittering below like a sea of stars. The skyscrapers, the honking cars, the distant murmur of life. All of it felt different now, charged with possibility. Her phone buzzed gently, a message from Ava's father, thanking her once more for saving his daughter's life and for showing the world the power of compassion. In the quiet stillness of the night, Matilda reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the frantic moments in the emergency room, the clash between policy and humanity, the loss of her job, and now, this incredible honor. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, critics, and moments of doubt. But she was ready. For Matilda, the true victory wasn't in the recognition or the spotlight. It was in the knowledge that one person, guided by courage and heart, could change the course of many lives. And as the stars twinkled overhead, she made a silent promise to keep fighting, to keep caring, and to lead with the quiet bravery that had defined her all along. If you enjoyed the story of Matilda, the brave nurse who risked everything to save little Ava and then caught the attention of Ava's father, Lennox, and even the president, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you feel about the story? How do you think it all ended? Did Matilda deserve the recognition she got? Let me know in the comments below. Also, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Be honest, I'm eager to see your ratings. And before you go, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'm curious to know which parts of the world this story has reached. Thanks so much for being here. Your support means everything. Stay tuned for more stories like this.